Hi, I'm Michael Janich, and welcome to the Martial Blade Concepts video series. Martial Blade Concepts, or MBC, is a system of personal defense that I developed that focuses on the use of edge weapons. It's drawn from the critical elements and fundamental principles of the Filipino martial arts, elements of the Indonesian martial arts, and other edge weapon systems, but it really focuses on modern self-defense. Now, the logic of the MBC system is described in detail in the first video of this series, Martial Blade Concepts, the enhanced version. If you haven't seen that video, or if it's been a while since you've seen that video, I strongly suggest that you go back and review the information in that video before you attempt anything you see here or in future volumes of this series. The reason for that is that MBC teaches in a very specific fashion, in a very specific order of information. We have a very progressive way to present information that allows you to develop a specific skill, master that skill, then learn additional skills on top of that, building on that foundation, and at the same time, deepening your understanding of what you already know. When I first started teaching the system that is now known as MBC back in the late 1990s, I taught using a very traditional methodology. We would typically present flow drills first, reflex training drills that you would practice with a partner, and those drills would teach you specific patterns of motion and sequences of angles. Once you learn those patterns, once you were comfortable with them, what we do is we would draw technique from them and teach you the combative applications. That was an efficient method of teaching, but it really wasn't the best method. What I found once I started teaching, especially in a seminar format and teaching armed professionals, folks like law enforcement personnel, military personnel, and professional security personnel, what I realized is that their need for combative skills was much more immediate. They didn't have time to learn a drill and then learn the application later on. They needed to know the application and understand the application right up front. So what I did was I changed the order of the presentation. When I did, the results we got were spectacular. People understood what was going on, they appreciated the drills more, and their ability to learn and retain information increased dramatically. So the MBC system, as far as its teaching efficiency and the order in which we presented information, has been refined over more than 10 years. Now, if you're familiar with any of the other materials I've done on edge weapon tactics, specifically the Fighting Folders series, to put it simply, this video series is designed to make that series obsolete. It's not that the information in that series is bad, it's just that it represents what is now an outdated training methodology. By presenting the information in the current system so that you're learning applications first and then reinforcing that with the training drills, I find you're going to be able to learn better, you're going to be able to retain the information a whole lot better, and you're going to achieve a higher skill level in a much shorter period of time. So with all that stuff said, let's go ahead and jump into the training. In addition to the critical skills that we introduced in Volume 1 of the MBC series, we also introduced a drill called Hubud. Let's review that real quickly and show you how we happen to do Hubud. Vince chops down this way with an angle 1, basically coming in from the outside with my left hand, slapping that aside, wedging upward with my right hand, then my left hand comes around, checks his arm down. At this point, I've got a clean shot at him. He does the same thing. Left, right, left, left, right, left. The real operative part of this is this wedging action right here. This is what's really going to save you because that is the structure. This is the speed, this is the structure that you want. We don't like blocking this way with the initial hand. If Vince is striking down and I block here, he's smart enough to simply yank that out of the way and go to work. It's not going to do me much good. If he's got a longer weapon like a stick, it can flop over and still hit me in the head. If instead of just hooking with his hand, he hooked with a knife and came back in, things get really ugly at that point. So we really like going to the outside. What this gives us also, a lot of times what you'll see in the traditional Filipino arts, is against a chopping attack, they'll block this way and sweep this along. Against a punching attack, they'll come from the outside. So you have to learn two different versions. Again, we try to keep it simple. We look at what the real payoff is, which is commonality of technique. We try to do everything from the outside. So when we put this into context with knives, trainer, awesome. What we do is we can use this as a potential defense against a high angle 5. So the angle 5 thrust comes in, I'm paring this aside, I wedge, and since I've got my knife close to Vince, I might as well take advantage of it. As I check his elbow here, I'm going to also draw cut this down. As I come back at Vince, he does the same. Check, and then cut. So what you get is the same basic mechanics. We'll go slow on Vince's side so you can see it. Once he parries that, he wedges here, and then he drags down and draw cuts that. When we talk about draw cut, what you're basically doing is you're creating an index typically with your forearm, and then dragging down until you actually get the cut. So again, he comes in, we get left, right, left, left, right, left. And you notice at the end of that motion, just as the check is coming in, you get that cut. So this becomes the high angle 5 thrusting version of this drill. And in the process, what that gives us is another way of defending against that high angle 5. So the high angle 5 comes in. Basically, now this check gets very active here. Once I've done the initial motion, I've gotten that cut. My next check is designed to drive his arm back, driving 30 degrees in that direction. Now I cook off, take that tricep, take it again, and get the mobility kill. So again, he thrusts, boom, get that offline and drive this check in hard. Wham. Now I cook off with that tricep cut, come back and pick that up again to make sure he doesn't come back, and then pick up the mobility kill. So what this gives you is another option as far as being able to defend against a high angle 5. Before, what we learned was high angle 5 comes in, we have the Serrata, where you can come in this way. We also have the offset Serrata this way. You want to be able to move from wherever your hands happen to be. So what you'll find is you start to practice MBC more and more, and especially once you get into the flow drills, the reflex training drills, you're going to find your hands starting in different positions. Live hand might be high, knife hand might be high or low. You'll start to feel the difference, and based on where you are in space, you're going to know instinctively with enough practice where you need to move to be most efficient, and that's really what we're looking at in the practice of all these skills. Also, what this gives us is a defense with a knife against that really evil close range reverse grip stab. And this is something that when you look at actual knife incidents, when you look at actual attacks on the street with impact weapons as well, hammers, tire irons and things of that nature, that close range angle 1 or angle 5 coming in, just trying to bury this right in my neck, bury it in my face, this is very difficult to deal with. Hubud is going to be one of your best choices for this. When we look at this from an empty hand standpoint, Hubud's going to save my life. He's coming in here, bang, this gets him offline. It also can give me immediate control over his elbow. Let's see how we did that. So we deflect here, and now what I'm doing is cupping the elbow from below, grabbing from above, pulling this down, and now at this point I can start playing with other toys. Well, when we look at this as far as the knife is concerned, we can introduce a couple of things here. One is we've talked about stopping power. We've talked about it in general terms as far as the way that we approach it. In general, what we're looking at is cutting the body parts that allow him to be dangerous to us. Physically, essentially crippling his body by cutting the tendons, cutting the muscles that allow him to wield the weapon effectively. The reason for that is that's the way the knife is going to work most effectively. When you look at stopping power with firearms, the ultimate stop with a firearm is basically to target the central nervous system. That's hard to do with a knife. This is one exception to that rule, and it's also something that, like all MBC, you need to only apply when you are legally justified in doing so, because at this point we're really getting into the lethal application of MBC. And this is something that, for lack of a better word, we call apple on a stick. What it comes down to is Vince is trying to kill me up close. He's hitting me with something, trying to thrust that knife into my neck. I'm basically pulling here. At this point, I have a straight shot going right up under the soft palate here into the base of his brain, into the medulla oblongata. So as long as I have, say, about a 3.5 inch blade, the angle that I'm going is straight in here, going right to the base of his skull. So that's the angle that I want. Again, this stuff is hardcore. This is something that you have to be comfortable with as far as the legality, the morality, the ethics of applying this level of force. But when you're defending your life, that's the type of tools that you're going to need in that situation. And especially for law enforcement personnel, military personnel who might be taking this and using this as a training template for their skills, if they're duty bound, we owe it to them to give them the best information we can. So again, when we look at the application of this, Vince strikes, boom, I deflect, I pull down, I thrust right back up. And basically at this point, I would continue to lever and take him right down onto the back of his head. Again, pretty extreme application there, but it's something that you may need to save your life someday, so we want to share that with you. When we look at Hubud on the low line, this is something we also introduced in volume 1 of the series. Basically what we have is a thrust coming in. We're still checking inward with the left hand. Now the right hand is coming over the top and we're wedging downward with the forearm here. I check, I lift, and now I give Vince the opportunity to do the same thing. Left, right, left, left, right, left, left, right, left, left, right, left. Excellent. So again, you should be familiar with that. If you're not, you can go back and review that from volume 1. This gives us, again, another option as far as defending against that low line. And this is particularly useful if my hands happen to be up high. He sees my hands high and he decides to take the low shot, because that's where my hands are going to have to go. I move from wherever I happen to be at that point in time. So if Vince thrusts low, bang. That's what it's going to look like in more combative speed. Left hand moves first, right hand provides the real structure as far as that deflection. And now what I'm going to do, notice that my knife blade is already pointing at his leg. I'm going to simply lift the elbow here to make sure it doesn't come back, and I'm going to take the cut to that leg. When we look at being able to finish this up, I haven't done anything to really take his arm out of the fight yet. So I'm going to come back and pick up the tricep. In the process, we'll show you another aspect of MBC that hasn't been introduced through video instruction yet, so this will be a first. He thrusts, bang, we lift. There's the cut to the leg. Now typically we'd come back, pick up the tricep here, check, and just to make sure if that leg isn't out of the fight, we really make sure that we dump that cut in with power, achieve the mobility kill, put him down and create distance. The difference that we can introduce here, instead of cutting that tricep, I'm actually going to come up across Vince's eyes. When you think about, again, defending yourself with a knife, you have to be able to articulate the fact that you are in fear for your life. You're in fear of death or grievous bodily injury. That's the only thing that's going to justify you introducing one of these into a fight. At that point, you're applying lethal force. You're trying to keep yourself alive. So you can take the basic mechanics of what we already know and up the ante to hit some other targets that can really pay big dividends in a fight. In this case, what we're doing is taking away the vision. If you can't see, you can't fight. So if I took Vince's vision away, that's going to give me a substantial advantage as far as being able to get away, create distance, and create safety. Now, in training this with a partner, although Vince is wearing glasses, I'm wearing glasses, we're going to be super careful here because these really are not protective glasses. You'd want to work this with goggles on and make sure that you're training safely. So we're just going to go super slow and not do this part too fast. When you train it, make sure you wear proper protective gear. So Vince thrusts, I deflect, work that leg, and now I would come across and cut his eyes here. Take the vision away, still check this, and at this point, with his vision obstructed, he's never going to see this coming. And now I really work that mobility kill. And again, on the mobility kill, what we look at, thrusting in, turning, and downward angle to be able to dump body weight and really get lots of power into that cut. Now when it comes to the cut across the eyes, again, this is something that you need to be ethically and morally comfortable with. You have to be prepared to do this, but again, you're defending your life at this point. Also, don't confuse cutting across the eyes, the actual orbital sockets, with so-called veils of blood. There are people out there who teach, I'm going to cut across the forehead and I'm going to let the blood run into his eyes to take away his vision. I'm not going to wait for anything to happen here. If I'm attacking his eyes, I'm attacking his eyes. I'm not cutting and waiting for the blood to trickle down. Again, don't confuse knife dueling and a lot of the crap that's out there with actual self-defense. If I'm defending my life empty-handed against somebody with a lethal weapon, I'm going to take every opportunity I can to stick a finger in his eye. When it comes to using the knife, it shouldn't be any different. This introduces another level of stopping power to MBC. He can't see, he can't fight. So when it comes to Hubud, we practice Hubud a lot. It's something that allows us to apply our skills empty-handed. It allows us to apply our skills with the knife and gives us other options as far as defenses against the most common attacks. What this is also going to do, if Vince has a weapon and I don't, if I don't finish the fight empty-handed, let's say Vince attacks with that overhead angle again. I defend myself here. It may be that I give him something to think about here and I use Hubud as a way to buy time to deploy my knife. That's something else that you want to look at Hubud for. So what we look at is, let's say that we do a little bit of Hubud drill. We work the drill this way. We're going back and forth. So what we do is we use Hubud to get the energy up a little bit. And then when I'm ready to do my thing, I would just basically look at striking Vince, doing something that replicates the idea of he's attacking me, I'm responding empty-handed. So he attacks, I defend. I stick some fingers in his eyes, shove him off, step back to a guard, draw my knife. So now what I'm doing is transitioning from an empty hand immediate reaction that keeps me alive long enough to draw my weapon. It's another very useful aspect of Hubud. It's something that we practice a lot when it comes to knife deployment. So once you got your basic deployment skills down, you can get your knife out reliably. Again, you need to challenge yourself. Up the ante, put it into realistic context and realize this keeps me alive. This allows me to finish the fight. One of the primary drills we focused on in volume 1 of this series was the outside-outside drill. And that's a drill that is specific to MBC. Let's review that real quick. So Eric feeds at angle 1, I Crosata that, get to the outside. He comes back angle 2, I meet that to stay to the outside. At this point he goes low, I pass that through, he comes back angle 3, Crosata, angle 4, meet. At this point I'm chambered to feed him, so we get Crosata, meet, pass it through, Crosata, meet, he's back at me, Crosata, meet, pass, Crosata, meet. Okay, so that's the outside-outside drill. Again, if that doesn't look familiar to you, go back and review it from volume 1 of the series. Now, one of the interesting things about this drill, and one of the real learning points, is against that angle 2, when I do this, and he goes low, passing that through. If you've seen the Counterblade Concepts video or seen any of the Counterblade Concepts material that I've shared before, the passing drill is something that we do quite a bit in there. This is also something you'll find in other Filipino martial arts. You may be familiar with it from other sources. The main thing you want to do on this, once I achieve this index, I'm using the back of my arm. So technically, Eric is on the outside of my arm. Even if he's trying to touch my gut, I can keep him on the outside of my body simply by turning my body through and using the strength of this structure to move that arm across. What this gives us is not only a backup for angle 2, but it starts to introduce this idea of going cross-body and passing it across. And that's something that we can do with either hand, whether we have a weapon or not. Okay, so let's take a look first of all at how we can finish up the application of this passing line and achieve something that we call underarm control. If he throws angle 2, I cut and check here. Now as I pass this through, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect the elbow from the back. So let's go ahead and do-si-do and show this a little bit clearer from this side. So he throws angle 2, I cut and check. As I pass this through, I'm bringing my hand, my palm, straight to my chest. Okay, so what I want to do is bring this in tight. That's going to give me that control. If I were doing an empty hand passing drill, I would have my other hand ready to go. So if we were here, this hand would be up just in case he decided to climb up this arm and get frisky and try to get me again, so I could pass it back in the other direction. By using the same common technique as far as the application, same common mechanics with the empty hand, we're here, I pass this through, this hand is up and high, I still have that capability if I need it. But as I suck this in, what I also want to look at is the ability to pressure cut. When we pressure cut, first of all, there are two different types of cutting. Ballistic cutting, where my knife is in motion before it makes contact with the target, and pressure cutting, where I achieve contact, apply pressure, and then move laterally down the edge. This is pressure cutting, and this is one of the most powerful ways that you can cut because you stabilize the target, apply lots of pressure, and then drop your body weight. So one more time, we're here, move this through, suck this in tight, and notice I've got the blade pressed right up against his arm here. I apply that pressure, I maintain my straight wrist angle, so I'm applying constant pressure all the way in. I drop my body weight. Now I'm chambered back here, I would thrust in, pressure cut that leg as well. So we put this together a little more fluidly. You can see that that flows together very nicely, being able to pass that through. Well, what I can do with this hand, I can do with this hand. So what we look at now is a movement that is very similar to passing drill, but done with the knife in hand. And where this really comes from, if you trace it back to probably its clearest roots in the Filipino martial arts, is actually a reverse grip drill called palasut. We haven't really delved into reverse grip, but there's no time like the present, so let's go ahead and introduce that, kind of give you a taste of where we'll be going with the reverse grip program in MBC. The palasut drill, basically the first thing I'm going to do in the simplest version of this is to check. So as Eric attacks with the angle 1, I check. In reverse grip, I now cut upward, and then I'm going to hook down, and when I hit the bottom of my arc, notice that I'm applying a pressure cut again here. I'm going to check his arm to his body. I can check either palm this way or palm this way. Either one is fine. I cut, and now it's his turn. Check, cut, hook, and he applies that pressure and cuts again. So we get check, cut, hook, cut, check, cut, hook, cut. And that's basically our mnemonic for the palo-suit drill. Now once you get into this, notice there I didn't check first. So as Eric came in, I simply hooked. That's also an option. So I can check, cut, and hook. I can check, hook, or I can simply hook and achieve basically the same thing. This one is going to give us all the mechanics and give us the cleanest application of this technique. Well, one of the things we look at is whatever we do reverse grip, we explore ways of doing that standard grip. So if we look at the same drill, I check here. Now I pass with this. So I'm passing with the back of my arm. Once I get to the bottom here, I can still draw cut this. Eric gets basically the same thing. So you get check, pass, cut, check, pass, cut. Now on the cut on this, I can also look at a push-pull and draw cut this. So now we get basically an equivalent of a push-pull Serrata here. I come back in. Eric does the same thing. Another way to play this drill, Eric attacks, I pass this through, I work the leg, come back and take the tricep. Now it's his turn. So he passes it, go ahead and take the leg and tricep. Again, he strikes here, I pass. Once I've got this pinned, comma cut here, take the tricep, back to him. Comma cut, tricep, beautiful. Nice. Now by understanding the palo-suit drill, the great thing about it is you not only have a method now to be able to develop those mechanics and get in lots of repetitions, just like any other flow drill, getting the reps in and then upping that intensity is what allows you to really develop usable skill. But the drills themselves, especially the one going low to the leg, that teaches you the application of this technique. So let's say Eric attacks. I may come in and simply pivot this way, pass this through, pin here, cut the leg, come back and pick up that arm again. If he's not down yet, I make sure I finish the job by going right back to the leg. So the application off of that, pretty easy to pull that out. It may be that my initial response is a startle response. He comes in, I check here, and then I bring this arm into play to pass. Now when I do that, I'm being nice to my partner when I pass this. Realistically, I check this, I'm going to hammer the shit out of this arm when I swing this in. Then pass this through. That may be a disarm all by itself. Check here, get the mobility kill, come back and pick up that arm again. So that gives me the ability to either check, then pass, or pass right off the bat. And either one of those, just remember that the pass is not just a gentle guiding it around in a circle. Combatively applied, it's a hit. And hitting right onto the flexor tendons in many cases can cause a spontaneous disarm. That's something that you need to take into consideration as far as your application of the technique. Now what's cool about this is anything that is going to pass through this area here is also fair game for palo-suit. When you think about it, I know that this is my zone 1. Well, in the process of passing this, I happen to go through zone 3 down here. Well, what if we started here? I simply make palo-suit work for me. Now in this case, what we'll probably do is start with a meet and then palo-suit right from there, which again, if you've seen any of the CBC material, should look really familiar. So he throws the angle 3, I cut here, I pass this, and I'm right into the leg and back to the arm. A little slower, there's my initial cut. Pass. Notice that this arm kind of dissolves. It's going to check here, go to work on that leg, back to take the tricep, back to the leg again if I need it. The operative part of this, the check here, is what allows me to prep this. Then I simply pass this down and I'm right in to target that leg. I can try to pick this up just with this arm, but having this arm for insurance is actually a really good way to go. So you get kind of a stuttered effect of being able to stop it and then pass it. If we take this down one step further, we go from 1 to 3. Let's say this is a low angle 5. We know that we have Hubud here. We know that we have offset Serrata. Well, Hubud uses both hands. Offset Serrata uses the left hand. What if we use the right hand only? What we've got is essentially the end of the arc of Palasut. So when Eric thrusts, I hook down, lift the elbow, take the leg, and I'm right back to the arm. So again, he thrusts, bang. Anyone who's ever studied traditional karate, Gedan Barai, downward block, or any similar motion in traditional martial arts, it's the same basic thing. We just don't necessarily have to do a lot of other body mechanics. We focus on the functional aspect, which is coming downward. So when you look at passing live hand, when you look at passing with the weapon hand, standard grip, reverse grip, empty hand, doesn't really matter. All of these things share the same common mechanics, and that's what you really want to understand. Play with all the different applications. Make them all part of what you do as far as your expression of MBC, CBC, your empty hand techniques overall. But understand that you're not learning a bunch of different things. What you're doing is learning a basic concept, basic set of mechanics, and then expressing that in different ways. One of the things we believe in very strongly in MBC is looking at the actual threats that are out there on the street. We analyze video whenever possible of actual violent attacks and try to figure out how our skills match up. This is unlike a lot of traditional martial arts where they say, well, you need to attack me this way so I can do this technique. Everything that we do is designed to deal with reality the best way that we know how. Now, when you look at the MBC system, especially everything you've seen thus far, we're focused on a right-hand bias. And that's the way MBC is built. That's the way most Filipino martial arts are built. They assume that you're right-handed. And that's 90+ % of the people out there. When you look at the attacks that typically happen on the street, they're going to be gross motor skill attacks primarily from a right-handed attacker. Statistically, that is what's going to happen most. But that doesn't mean that lefties don't exist. It doesn't mean that lefty attackers don't exist. But in dealing with those, what we need to do is try to rely on the skills we already have rather than trying to do the mirror image of everything we've got. Let's see how this works and see some of the limitations of how to approach lefties from a traditional right-handed perspective and then show you how we do it. So let's say that Vince gives me a right-handed angle 2. We know that what we'd like to do against a right-handed angle 2 is cut and check here. That would be our meat. Well, if he puts a knife in his left hand and he feeds the same way, now I'm kind of stuck on the inside. He's got access to hit me with the other hand. I really haven't created a whole lot of opportunities here. And just the action of trying to do this becomes kind of awkward. It's not really the happiest place to be. One of the sayings we have in MBC is to have a plan and work your plan. So let's go back to the things we know best, the master technique of MBC, the first thing we learn. So Vince is attacking me right-handed. He attacks. I cut basically with an angle 1. There's the pass. Now I'm going to cut his tricep with either a 2 or a 4. Given his height, let's call it a 2. I step in, I check, and now I'm going to finish with that mobility cut going for the angle 3. So my motions are basically 1, 2, 3. If I take that plan and now I apply it against a left-handed attack, this is the way a lefty is going to attack me. It's going to be a forehand shot coming in this way. So what I'm going to do is use the same pattern of motion, but apply it against this attack. So when Vince attacks, I'm getting out of the way, cutting the back of his hand. So essentially I'm using a follow. What was against the right hand, a pass, against the left is a follow, but it's the exact same motion as far as I'm concerned. Again, he attacks, I cut. My next shot, angle 2, still takes that tricep. But now my check, instead of driving 30 degrees that way, I'm checking with this hand, driving 30 degrees that way instead. That's what's going to keep him from coming back at me. And again, what I'm achieving is the same principle, a strut that is allowing me to use body structure and skeletal structure to keep him back. Now, once I finish this cut here, I don't have a quadricep to play with. So we're back to the idea of using peripheral nerves for stopping power. If you think about the sciatic nerve, it basically comes out of the butt, comes down this way, and it tells a lot of that leg what to do. People will talk about hamstringing people, cutting the biceps femoris here, the hamstring muscle. That is not going to take Vince out of the fight. It's basically going to cause him to have foot drop. He won't be able to bend his knee. But what will really significantly disable him is cutting that sciatic nerve. So what I'll do is the same exact motion, thrusting inward, turning, and cutting the sciatic, basically at the bottom of the butt cheek, get below the wallet, get below whatever might be in the back pocket, and cut the sciatic right across there. So what we're doing is cutting the nerve that allows the brain to tell the leg what to do. Let's take a look at this again. So he attacks, we lean back, we cut and check here. Again, this check is driving here. I'm still chambered for that angle 3. I would thrust, turn, and power through that sciatic. If that didn't finish him, notice the turn of my body. This is where I might bring some of my unarmed skills into play, like a knee and a stomp, to be able to finish and achieve that mobility kill. So what I can do is use the same pattern of motion to be able to achieve that. I can also deconstruct this technique if necessary. Let's say that I can't chase his hand with my angle 1. No problem. He attacks, I evade, I cut and check here. So I'm jumping in on the second motion, I'm chambered here, step in, drive hard, work that sciatic. I achieve the same basic thing. I simply evaded on the first motion and didn't do the first cut. So a lot of the principles we've talked about as far as deconstructing, the same master technique we've already learned in NBC, all that stuff still applies. So by using that master technique, we can deal with a high left-handed forehand attack. It's still an angle 2 from our perspective, but we need to look at the mechanics of what it actually is. Well, what works high line works low line. All we have to think about is fingers down, blade down. So Vince is attacking with a low left-handed forehand. As far as I'm concerned, this is an angle 4. Okay, again, the numbering is just a matter of convenience. What's really important here is use what I already know, use the master technique. So the idea of coming in and cutting behind this, cut and check, expose that sciatic, thrust, and cut, that's what I'm really looking for. Now again, chasing his arm forehand to forehand, I might be able to catch it. But one of the great things about low line is all I have to do is hollow out and I still have pretty good access to his upper arm. So what I can look at is he throws that shot, I hollow out, I cut the tricep twice, check the back of it here, and then work that sciatic. And again, from here, I still have knees, stomps, all kinds of other stuff to make sure I achieve that mobility kill. So since I'm not cutting the quad that is going to support weight, I may need to embellish on that a little bit if the sciatic itself is not enough. Fortunately, I have the tools and skills to do that. So basically what we're doing against the left-handed forehands, which again are angles 2 and 4, we're applying follows. We also have the ability to jump in on the second shot. Just as we did on the high line, we could do that on the low line. So Vince takes that shot, I simply hollow out, I look for the reference point, cut and check, and again, work the sciatic. Same thing applies. Now, the great thing about this, I'm on the outside. So if I think about that reference, if I'm dealing with left-handed backhand attacks, which are still going to be angle 1 and angle 3 as far as I'm concerned, I already know what I need to do based on what I just did, which is I want to make sure I stay here. The concept of getting to the outside, staying to the outside. So when Vince throws that lefty angle 1, I cut and check, I drive, and work the sciatic. Pretty simple. What's the difference between a 1 and 3? Not enough for me to be concerned about because it looks the same as far as my reference point. He throws the angle 3 lefty, I cut and check, and I work the sciatic. The trick here is being more preemptive. When I see the back of this arm, again, it becomes a reference point. I know that I want to cut this and shut it down, not allow it to come toward me. The more that I drive this, the more I shove it 30 degrees in that direction, the more exposure I'm going to get for working that sciatic nerve and achieving that mobility kill. Now, one of the tough parts of dealing with left-handed attacks is when you start looking at angle 5s. If we look at a low angle 5, what we're actually going to do is kind of go back to some of the counterblade concepts material. If you're not familiar with this, we're going to go through it pretty quickly. We're not going to try to reteach it here. If you haven't seen this, I strongly recommend you go back and take a look at it. Let's go back and put it in the right hand. The primary defense that we use against a low angle 5 is what we call a split X. Vince thrusts, I hollow out, and what I'm doing is I'm blocking with both arms. The backs of both arms, when you look at it from the top, it's an X. When you look at it from the side, you can see the split between those two. That's why we call this a split X. One other way to think of this, when we think of polysuit or passing with this hand, polysuit and passing with this hand, where these two come together, that's where the split X meets in the middle. Okay, so what would happen in CBC land, he thrust, bang. I hook the back of the elbow, pull this in tight, create a lock here, and at this point I can finish the fight. We'll take a look at this from the other side. Again, he thrusts, bang, I pick this up, hook, pull this in, saw this here, and I can be breaking things, doing whatever I need to do to take him out of the fight. That's the split X. The real structure that we're looking at is this. I can apply that with the knife against a right-handed attack. If he thrusts, block here. Once we achieve this control, you've seen this before. Again, reference point, pressure cut, and take a quad. Where did we see that before? Pop quiz, angle 2, cut and check, pass that through, pressure cut, take a quad. Again, it should look familiar. Angle 5 again, please. Bang, pressure cut, take the quad. Again, the more you learn, the less you know. We have lots of commonality of technique. So if we think about that, right hand high, left hand low, split X. Now go ahead and go lefty, please. Vince thrusts. I'm still stopping this to make sure I stay alive long enough to do this and now work the sciatic. The trick on this is the control over this arm. We've also seen that from the same exact place, that underarm wrap. So a little bit slower. We stop this here. I'm cutting the bicep here as I pull this in, bringing my palm to my chest. Now as I turn, notice how that brings him forward, straightens out this arm, especially if I've already cut the bicep. And now I'm in position to work that sciatic. So what I'm doing is going from here, cutting as I pull this here, and then thrusting here. One more time, please. I stop it, cut, suck this in tight here. Notice how that's levering that elbow. That gives me access to the sciatic here to be able to finish this. Again, I've got stomps and other things if I need to add those in. Lefty versus righty or mismatched leads is not something that is easy to do. But the more logical you make it and the more you rely on things you already know, the simpler it becomes. It's something that you have to deal with. But rather than trying to learn mirror image of everything you've done or to come up with contrived techniques that only work against a lefty and you're only going to practice 10% of your time, focus on doing what you already do well. Have a plan and work your plan. Now, since I started teaching MBC publicly, I've gotten a lot of requests from armed security personnel, law enforcement officers, military personnel, private security folks. And typically, if they train knife at all, it's a very small component of what they do. Most of their focus is on firearms application, some empty hand, and they also want to have some knife. So typically what they're looking for is really a crash course. Even the basic critical skills of MBC sometimes are too much for them. Now, in exploring the possibilities for that, and also in exploring our cane technique, if you've seen martial cane concepts, you know what we're talking about. Looking at kind of a one-size-fits-all, one technique that you can learn and apply. This goes back to my training in Serrata, Eskrima. It's called Cuerdas. Serrata actually came from the Cuerdas system. Angel Cabales, the founder of Serrata, learned it from his instructor, Felicimo Dizon. When we talk about Cuerdas, what you're basically looking at with stick is gripping the stick and then bracing it with the back of your hand. And typically you'll have about one fist separation here. And what you've got is now something that is both a platform to strike from and also a very universal guard. This becomes almost like a front sight. You simply turn into anything that's coming at you. So if Eric strikes me with an angle 1, I'm basically kind of snapping this out to shut this down. I can now control his hand and basically go to work. Again, we would work with stick the same way we work with knife, which is take away his ability to wield the weapon. So again, he would strike, and we basically control. Notice I'm controlling the hand. I would break the ulna here, take this out of the fight, take the elbow out of the fight, and then look at taking his shin to be able to achieve the mobility kill. If you were striking angle 2, bang, blocking here. Same basic deal as far as taking that hand out of the fight, taking the shin out of the fight to be able to achieve mobility kill. The operative thing here is not fighting with stick, it's understanding the basics of this Cuerdas platform. So if we take the sticks out of the equation now, and we go back to knife, what we look at is I can achieve the same basic thing, as long, of course, as I have a single-edged knife, nothing with a sharpened false edge. You try with those, it's very self-correcting. You'll kind of realize the error of your ways very quickly. But what we've got is the ability to kind of draw everything into center line and now have kind of a one-size-fits-all type of application. So against an angle 1, as it comes in, what I'm looking at is actually driving in to the base of the bicep here. The reason I want that is because once I pressure cut this, I'm going to wrap over the top of the elbow. My cut follows through just like the pressure cuts that I would normally do against the upper arm. I would be chambered for the cut to the quad. Let's do-si-do and show it from this side. So again, air comes in, I'm stopping it here, basically pressure cutting through, maintaining pressure with my palm as I drag the blade through, suck this in here, and then I work the quad. If it was an angle 3, I basically wouldn't even acknowledge the difference between the two because I simply stop it here, pressure cut, suck this in, and work it the same way. If it was an angle 2, bang, again here, pressure cut, push the arm away, work the leg. And angle 4, same deal. I'm basically driving this in, stopping it here, pressure cut, and working it this way. What this gives you is kind of a basic application that you can use really out of the box against just about anything. It's something that we add to the rest of what we do. You may say, well, why do we have the rest of the system if that's so simple and so straightforward? Because what this requires is that ability to dive in and be preemptive. You're not always going to have that option. You're not always going to have the ability to have the knife out and be in a guard position before bad things start to happen. So we need to have the other skills because typically if we can stack this much stuff in our favor, then typically we would be using other means to get out of that situation, being as avoidant as possible so we don't have to fight our way out of it. But what we can do also is kind of split the difference with this stuff. What I mean by that is if you don't have the pure de cuerdas guard position and you're not working from that specific place, what do you have that's a little more spontaneous? Well, one of the things, if you've seen our Practical Unarmed Combative series, anytime that we're dealing with either a punch or a knife attack, doesn't matter, one of the basic techniques we teach is what we call a shoulder stop. When you look at the instinct of people, if you get up on YouTube and take a look at street fights, a lot of times you'll see people doing this kind of thing instinctively, trying to hold people back, hoping their arms are longer than the other guy so they don't get hit. Well, that instinct of driving your arms out is very similar to what we would do with de cuerdas. When it comes to the empty hand application and angle 1 or somebody comes in, we would simply suck this in tight and now we'd go to work with all of our hits. When we put this back into context with the knife, let's go ahead and do-si-do again, please. When we put this into context with the knife, as a spontaneous reaction, what we get is what we call punch and cut. I'm still going to be checking with this hand, I'm still going to be extending with this hand, but what I'm going to do is use the fist that is below the knife as the stop for that shoulder stop. So the angle 1 comes in, bang, I'm basically hitting here. Now as I suck this in, I reach over the top, suck this under my armpit to achieve that control. This also helps roll the juicy part of the arm out. I pressure cut that, and I work the quad. So again, the attack comes in, stop it, suck it in as I pressure cut, and I work the leg. Against the angle 3, again, same deal. Stop it here, suck that in as I pressure cut, and I work the quad. So with the punch and cut, what I get is that ability to shut things down kind of preemptively, but it's a little more free-flowing because my hands are flying a little more instinctively as opposed to a very consciously learned martial arts technique. Against an angle 2, same deal. I see that coming, I punch and cut. Now the trick here is make sure that I have separation between my hands to shut this down. Ideally, my cut is going to take it right at the base of the tricep and tricep tendon here. Cut, drive, and work right through. So again, he goes to attack, bang, shut that down, and work the quad. Again, against an angle 4, really just kind of ignore the fact that it's a low line because I'm working with the upper arm that I still have access to in the same way. So he throws the angle 4, I just adapt my hands to whatever I need, cut, and then work it that way. So the punch and cut shares a lot of common traits with the meat. When we look at the meat with the back of the hand, angle 1 please, cut and check here. Little more learned technique, using the back of the arm to check with. We know we have the plus sign working for us. If that isn't working for you, or if instinct simply takes over, one of the things we also emphasize is understand and accept your instinct and use it as a foundation for training. In this case, if human beings are hardwired to do this, let's acknowledge that, and if it happens, you have a technique that's based on that. The angle 1 comes in, I shut it down, pressure cut, suck this in, get the mobility kill, and I can translate that instinct into a very useful technique. Whether it's de cuerdas or punch and cut, it's something you need to add to your MBC arsenal. At this point in the instruction, what we're going to start doing is looking at some of the drills that we use in the MBC system. We've gotten a good feel for combative application and the basic skills that we need. The drills that we use are designed to isolate specific techniques and be able to refine those techniques, at least those initial movements. So one of the first ones we're going to look at is what's called the Largo Mono drill. When we talk about Largo Mono, what we mean is one of the ranges of the Filipino martial arts. Typically they have largo, medio, corto, long, medium, short. So Largo Mono simply means long hand. You'll also hear it called Larga Mano. There are different dialects and everything in the Philippines. You'll hear it referred to both ways. When we talk about Largo Mono, if Vince is attacking me with an angle 1, basically what I'm doing is I'm at a range to where I can reach his weapon hand with my weapon, but I really can't effectively reach his hand. That would define Largo Mono. So obviously that's something that's going to be defined partly by your range from the other person, but also by the length of your weapon. With a knife, it's going to be a little bit less than 2 arms length. When we talk about medium range, we're up a little closer to where I can actually bring this hand into play and do things like cruzadas, because if I can use the live hand, I'm at medium range. And you'll hear different versions of where corto range starts or short range starts. Some people will say it's where I can use the puño or butt of the weapon to strike with. Some people say that is when you can hit with elbows and knees. They're pretty much the same. So what we look at is long, medium, short. Here what we're focusing on is Largo Mono. Obviously, with what you know from MBC already, if Vince is attacking with an angle 1 and I'm doing this, we basically have a pass. And what we're doing here is practicing the pass for angles 1 through 4 in sequence. That's really what the Largo Mono drill comes down to. So the way that it starts, both Vince and I will set up in a reference stance. He'll attack with an angle 1. I'll execute a pass. Notice that I step slide as far as my footwork. When we talk about that, what I'm doing is I'm stepping in the direction I want to move, which is away from the attack. But as I step, I'm actually kind of tracking, leaving the ball of my foot or the toes of my foot on the ground. So they kind of drag along and act as a probe. I don't want to simply step and commit my weight without knowing what I'm stepping on. Here in the studio, no problem. Out on the street, who knows what you're going to trip over. Once I've achieved that, I drag this foot back, and I always want to maintain a distance between my feet. I don't want my feet to come together like this because then I'll have too narrow a point of balance and it's easy for me to be knocked off balance. So that's my basic footwork. We pretty much know that already from our knowledge of the pass, but it's really going to come into play. We really get to refine that as part of this drill. So again, Vince attacks angle 1, pass. Now what he's going to do is he's going to move forward, same thing, step slide. He closes the distance, throws angle 2. I cut with an angle 2, pass. He does it again, angle 3. He does it again, angle 4. Now at this point, I come back at him. So I attack 1, 2, 3, 4. He comes back at me, 1, 2, 3, 4. I come back at him, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. That's the basic Largo Mono drill. And what you're really learning there is how to do the pass, how to cut and basically snipe at that hand and try to achieve that defanging the snake. This by itself is a critical skill in MBC. Because again, if you do this right, especially if you can catch 1s and 3s and catch those flexor tendons or the muscles of the forearm, what that allows you to do is to cut deeply enough, take away the grip on the weapon, and essentially your problems are over at that point. So this is a critical skill. This is a great drill to be able to develop that. And in the process, you're also developing a feel for distance appreciation, and you're starting to add footwork into the mix of what you do. That brings up another important point as far as MBC is concerned. People say, you guys don't really do footwork. Yes, we do. But we learn everything flat-footed first. The reason for that is people are going to attack you when conditions most favor them. They'll often attack when you are in confined quarters and you have no room to move. And there are so many martial arts, so many self-defense systems who say, well, I have to move out of the way, I have to do this. What if you don't have that opportunity because you're basically penned in? You have nowhere to move. You've got to stand your ground and fight. We figure if you can do that first and have the confidence to stand your ground and pull off your technique, then when you have the luxury to move, it becomes that much easier. So that's the basic teaching methodology we use as far as footwork goes. Now, one of the other things you'll learn out of the Largo Mono drill is what's called lastico. Lastico is basically a rubber band motion. And when you think about it, let's go ahead and go through the drill again. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4. At the end of this 4, basically I'm leaning back, I'm going from defense to offense, and this is where I come back in at Vince. He comes back in at me, there's his lastico motion as well. What lastico means is rubber band. And what that is the transition from here where I'm defending and here where I'm attacking. Where this comes into play, we've actually already seen. We've seen this in the application of our master technique. Vince throws the angle 1, boom, I get out of the way, and now I'm rubber banding or lastico motion, coming right back in, driving to get that check. So the ability to sway back, cut, and then sway back forward and go from defense immediately to offense is another one of the learning points in the Largo Mono drill. Pretty straightforward drill, pretty basic. Make sure your feet don't come together. Go nice and easy. When you're first training, go ahead and put those arm guards on, because unless you've got the control that we've got from years of training, it's real easy to start dinging those arms. The bruises add up quickly. The next drill I like to look at is what we call the 6-count drill. I picked this up from modern Arnis during my study of that. You'll see it in other Filipino martial arts as well. Sometimes you'll hear it called by different names, including the small box drill. What's going to happen with this, I'll go ahead and attack Eric first. I'll attack with an angle 1. He's going to cut and check with a meet for that angle 1. He did a proper meet, which means that he follows through. He's now chambered near his left hip. He's going to throw an angle 4 from there. I'm checking, and here's my push-pull cruzada. So I draw back just like that. Let's take a look at that again. So I throw the angle 1, cut and check. He throws the angle 4, and I push-pull cruzada. So what we've got is a counter for counter type of thing that we're setting up here. So we're going to go from attack to defend as we flow through this. Those are the two basic motions, and we'll both end up doing those, but we need to connect them in some way. So what we're going to do is we go from angle 1 to the angle 4, push-pull. And one of the things that we emphasize here by using this push-pull cruzada, notice that I've stopped his hand before he crosses center line. This actually helps him do the next motion. As I throw an overhead, he's going to raise the blade, raise that wedging forearm, and he's going to do an opening cruzada to peel the hands apart. Let's do that one more time. So we have angle 1, push-pull for the 4. Notice that this is kind of a locomotion action here. I go from hip to shoulder, over the top, and he does that opening cruzada. At this point, he's chambered for an angle 1. We do the same thing, but now we've switched roles, so I have to defend. So I defend the angle 1 with a meet, I throw the 4, and now he comes over the top. I raise this up, I wedge underneath, and again, the wedging action here is what's most important. A lot of people simply want to pull apart. What I want is the ability to wedge and really stop this with some authority. I pull across, and essentially we've completed 6 motions. I'm chambered for the angle 1. We start all over again. So we get 1, 4, overhead, 1, 4, overhead. This is the basic version of the 6-count drill. We slow it down again, 1, 4. Now one of the things here, if you forget what's going on or if your partner forgets, one of the things you can do to help them is actually give them a little lift on this arm, kind of cue them as far as what they need to do next. That's in the basic version. And when we check here with this push-pull cruzada, we're trying to keep that hand from crossing center line. Once you start to get familiar with the 6-count drill, you get into the actual flow of it. This is something that you can scale up and really start rocking on. You don't want to get lost in the drill itself. You don't want to just do repetitions for doing repetition's sake. You want to know what you're doing with the drill. And you also want to start adding more unpredictable elements into this. The way we look at the drills is not so much specific defense. We look at the sequence of angles. So let's say typically the angle 1 comes in, I cut and check with the meet, I throw the angle 4 at Eric. he does the push-pull cruzada at that point, provided that that's where his hands start out. Well, let's say instead he throws at angle 1 and I cruzada this. I throw the angle 4. The most natural thing for him to do is to ride that motion and to come back with a meet for the angle 4. One more time. I cruzada this. He simply flows through and comes back with the meet. At this point, he goes overhead. Let's take a look at it from this side. So he cruzadas my motion, cruzada, I flow through, I cut with the angle 4, I come overhead. So we have a cruzada, meet, overhead, cruzada, meet, overhead, cruzada, meet, overhead. Now let's say right here, I decide to do a meet again and come back. I don't have to tell Eric I'm going to do that. He simply senses that, and the way he senses that, I stop that arm. He now feels, based on where that arm is in space, that the most efficient motion for him is the push-pull cruzada. Now he comes over the top, boom, we go here. He may do the same thing to me. I realize that I need to change gears and come back to this. Both of those are right. We know that we've got a meet for an angle 1. We know we've got a cruzada for the angle 1. The person experiencing that, go ahead and do a meet, please. When I'm here, I realize that my arm has not crossed his center line. He comes back with the angle 4. I've got to stop that, and I simply take the most direct path to be able to cut that. If he cruzadas me instead, now I'm over here. I see this coming. I turn my whole body so that I'm cutting and checking, bringing that all in together, doing the meet against the angle 4. This teaches you how to move from where you happen to be at that point in time. And this is a great learning point in our drills. It's one thing, at first you definitely have to define what you're going to do. You want to make sure that you learn the drill by rote fashion. But so many people get lost in the drills to where they're just doing drills and they have no idea what they're accomplishing. By making the drills more challenging and introducing these variables, throw in a cruzada instead of a meet, that's what makes them spontaneous, and that's what builds reflex. So the saying that we have in NBC is that drills give you repetition. The changes in the drills give you reflex, and that's what we're really after. Now, with all this stuff said, we already know what we're doing as far as an application with a meet for an angle 1. The angle 4 that we throw off of that is actually a good thing for us to practice. Let's review that real quick. Eric throws the angle 1, an immediate angle 4 would be a thrust to the armpit. We've seen that before as far as our combat applications on this. So when I practice the idea of 1-4, a 4 is anything I want it to be. We've been illustrating it so far with the idea of a cut, so when the overhead comes, it makes it easier for me to learn this. Does that mean that I can't do the drill by thrusting here? He cuts downward, comes over the top, and now we do a thrusting version. All I'm doing is changing my hand position to emphasize the thrust. And again, what that represents, the angle 1 comes in, boom, there's that thrust to the armpit. We cut through the bicep, cut the quad. And now what we've done is practice the initial 2 movements of a valid combative application. That's where the drills really shine. They allow us to get in lots of repetitions and to do it in a scalable fashion where we can really rock and move and challenge each other to keep up with that pace. Now, the one that we haven't really looked at as far as application is the overhead. When the overhead comes, we typically go from there to the angle 1. Well, we know an angle 1 is basically anything in this 90 degrees as far as our expression of it. So what we look at is the overhead comes, I'm going to go for a straight downward shot. So we do the opening cruzada, the roof block as it's sometimes called, wedging through here. Once I've cut, I grab the wrist here, and I'm going to come down and cut right through that bicep, take that arm out of the fight. That leaves me chambered at my hip. I drive forward, and I cut the quad. Again, slowly, roof, cut, and work the quad. A little quicker. You can see how that flows very quickly. And again, that's something that comes right out of the drill. That initial motion of overhead to the 1 can easily be adapted to that. By doing the drill, getting lots and lots of repetitions of that, I'm burning in, although there's technically no such thing as muscle memory, the more you do something, the stronger the synapses become that allow you to do that motion comfortably. So what you get is what's often called familiar task transfer. You do something over and over again, you get better at it. If you want to call it muscle memory, fine. Doesn't really matter what you call it. But the more you practice and the more you challenge yourself in practice, the better off you're going to be and the better reflexes you're going to have in a fight. The next drill we're going to look at is the Serrata drill, and this comes out of Serrata Eskrima. Typically it's taught as a stick drill. Serrata does have a knife component. I never found it to be very strong, or at least it wasn't shared with me in my study of the art. But the sequence of angles in it, I think, is very important. And based on what we know of the 6-count drill, which we looked at just a moment ago, we combine that with the Serrata drill, it's going to prime us for another drill that's very important, and it's a core element of MBC. With the Serrata drill, we're going to start off with an angle 3 attack. So the angle 3 comes in, and I'm going to pivot into this and do a meet for the angle 3. From here, I'm going to throw an angle 2. Vince is going to check that, and now he's going to do a push-pull crosata to cut that arm. Let's take a look at that again. We start with the 3, we pivot into that, and I cut. Notice that I've got good structure as far as my meet. Simply the pivoting of my body creates that cut across the bicep. I throw the angle 2, he push-pull crosata. At this point, he's chambered to come overhead. At this point, I come up and I do my roof block or my opening crosata against the overhead. Peel these apart. Now I come down angle 3, Vince does his meet, he comes back angle 2, I push pull and come over the top. So we get 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead. Excellent. That's the basic motion of the Serrata drill. Again, it's a reciprocal drill. Attack, defend, attack, defend. Now we already know, as far as our application of the meet for the angle 3, we've already seen what we do with that. This drill reinforces that. Let's see how. So the angle 3 comes in, there's the meet. My next motion is an angle 2. Now in the traditional version of this, I'm thrusting toward Vince's throat. It's inconsistent with where we want to go with MBC. Doesn't really provide stopping power, although it does provide lethality. But what we do is we take the concept of the angle 2, we cut the bicep, rotate, center up on him, and now I've got good control over that arm, and then I can simply go in and finish and cut the leg. Typically what you'll find in all of these drills, the first 2 motions, the initial defense, and then the counter to that, are the things that support our applications. So again, the angle 3 comes in, I pivot back. So the 3-2 motion, one more time, is what gives us the real critical function on that. By practicing that over and over and over again in the context of the Serrata drill, I get really good at that and the body mechanics that power it. I simply add the collection, that underarm wrap on the arm, and I've got really good functional technique. Now one of the other things that we get off of this is the idea of the push-pull crosata, and in the context of this drill, the sequence of angles that we're playing with. Let's say we start from the top, I attack Vince with the angle 3, he throws the angle 2, I push pull, I come over the top, there's his roof block. So what we've got is push pull followed by an overhead. What does that overhead represent? Well, in the application, Vince throws the angle 2, I push pull, the overhead is my next target priority, which is his tricep. So again, he's coming in here. Remember on the push pull, I'm driving this forward, pushing this into the edge and cutting here, which keeps his arm at length or a distance for me, so that now when I come with that overhead, it's perfectly positioned for me to cook off with power and cut that tricep. If we add the mobility kill into that, he comes in, push, pull, cut, and then simply ride that cut down, chamber for the angle 3, and finish the leg that way. Now again, as you learn this drill, what you want to do is learn it in the basic sense first. So as the angle 3 comes in, we start with the meet, Vince does the push-pull crosata, and then the overhead is going to be that opening crosata or the roof block. Once you get used to that, we can also mix in elements of crosata. So let's say that that initial attack comes in and I crosata that instead. I forced Vince across his center line. When I throw the angle 2, the most logical thing for him to do is to pivot with both arms, make that a meet for the angle 2, that chambers him for the overhead, we come over the top. Same thing, I throw the angle 3, he crosatas me, I simply flow through, make that a meet for the angle 2, I come over the top. So you get crosata, meet, opening crosata, crosata, meet, opening crosata. Nice. And again, as you get more and more into it, you understand that version of it. You practice it in exactly that way. Crissata, meet, and then the roof block. Then you go back to the idea of meet, push, pull, crissata, and the roof block. Then, training with your partner, you start to mix and match. This is where we approach what we call our 50-50 concept. This is the same thing we looked at in the 6 count. Is it a meet? Is it a crissata? He doesn't know yet, nor do I when I feed that angle 1, or in this case, an angle 3. What that gives you is that element of spontaneity, that element of unpredictability. There's only 2 possibilities, hence the 50-50 concept. But what it does is it defines, again, if I throw an angle 3 at Vince and he doesn't meet, am I stuck on the outside of center line where push-pull is going to make the most sense and be the most efficient? Or is he going to crissata me, in which case I cross center line and I have to roll back and do that as a meet? Which one is it? I don't know yet. That's the beauty of it, because it gives me spontaneous reflex. It gives the drill unpredictability. So rather than just going through the motions, as many people say these drills are just a rote drill, they're not. Not when done properly, not when done the NBC way. The next drill we're going to look at is really kind of the core of our standard grip drills when it comes to NBC, and it's called the Sombrata drill. My understanding is Sombrata means to shadow. And again, this is a reciprocal drill, a counter for counter drill. You'll hear them called that way as well, because you're alternating roles as attacker and defender. Now, we already know that we have the 6 count drill. So if I attack Eric, angle 1, angle 4, then we go overhead, he comes back at me, 1, 4, overhead, 1, 4, overhead, 1, 4, overhead, 1, 4. Notice my chamber position here. Now, if we're doing the Serrata drill, I'd kind of start right here and I'd fire an angle 3. He'd come back angle 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead. You get the idea. 3 starts here. If I fire 1, 4, if I was going to do 6 count, I would go overhead. What if I happen to jump right into 3, 2, and then do the overhead? What we've got now is 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. That's Sombrata. If you master the other 2 drills, or at least become familiar with their mechanics, it's the easiest way to achieve this drill, because you have all the component parts. It also gives you an insight into what we call the chess game, which is your ability in the midst of this thing. Let's say that I decided pop quiz for Eric and I throw an overhead. He happened to Hubud his way out of that. That's fine too. It's another way to connect the drills. He could have gone into 6 count. He could have gone into Serrata. The thing is, he didn't miss a beat. I changed. He flowed with it. That's an introduction to what we call the chess game. That's the unpredictable aspect of the drills. Each drill is designed to isolate specific skills and give you repetitions and give them to you in a scalable way where you can scale the intensity and scale the speed to really challenge yourself. Then you start breaking out of that and throwing different variations into the drill, and that's where you get spontaneous reflex. Again, drills give you repetition, changes give you reflex. Let's review this again. 1, 4. From here, I go 3, 2, overhead. 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. All the same elements that we had from the previous 2 drills are now simply combined into one. Now, one interesting thing here, let's go ahead and do-si-do for a sec. When it comes to the angle 3, when you see this done with stick or in other knife systems, you'll see this motion here, basically a wing block, where I've got the tip of the blade down and I'm basically cutting this way and then coming with the angle 2. Again, what we'll get is 1, 4, 3, 2. Now, if that looks awkward, it is. With a stick, because of the mass of the stick, you can have a different structure that's going to give you some good, solid structure to block another weapon. When it comes to a knife, take a piece of meat, staple it to the wall, and try to cut it this way with a steak knife. Doesn't work very well, doesn't work real well in this drill. And also against a savvy player here, if he throws an angle 3 and I'm doing this, he's just going to check that elbow, tie up my arms, and I'm screwed at that point. So the idea of teaching myself to do something that, because I did it with a stick, I'm going to do it this way with a knife. Look at the attributes of the weapon. That's what this is all about, is really adapting things to what the weapon does. How does this cut most effectively? When I can actually put good structure behind it. We've looked at the angle 3 the way we do it, and we actually pivot the whole body and use the body to generate power for that cut. When we look at what we do as far as deflecting with this hand, cutting with this hand, it's the same mechanics of turning the body, turning the shoulders, and turning the hips to be able to drive that. So that's why we don't do it this way. If you do sombrata with knife, I strongly suggest that you give this a try. Try to get rid of this because you're going to cut with a whole lot more efficiency. Now, once you get into the sombrata drill, once you get familiar with the basic mechanics of it, you notice everything that we've been doing has been based on meats for the most part, with the exception of that push-pull cruzada. Once you start getting into it, for the 1s and the 3s that we already have, nothing says that you can't include cruzadas in that. So let's say we flow a little bit. Threw in a couple cruzadas there just to keep Eric on his toes. Again, he didn't miss a beat. So what you see is on those 1s and 3s, instead of doing a meet every time, you mix in the cruzada. Again, 50-50 chance. You'll either experience this and come down this way, or you'll be shoved through, in which case you flow and you end up doing the meet for the angle 4. Same for the 3. I experience a hard stop here, push, pull. If I'm passed through, I ride that through, do the meet for the angle 2, and come over the top. The basic sense, get the mechanics down, work with the sombrata drill, get those repetitions built in. Then start playing with it. Incorporate the cruzadas and make it more dynamic. Now you may be looking at this and saying, you know, that's just a lot of arms churning. I don't really think there's a whole lot of payoff in that. What am I really learning from this thing? Let's take a look at the sequence of angles here. 1, 4, 3, 2. 1, 4, 3, 2. Have we seen this anywhere before? Let's say that angle 1 comes in. 1, 4, 3, 2. We've seen it at least once before. Let's say the angle 1 comes in. 1, 4, 3, 2. The drills are designed to reinforce the sequence of angles that you already know from the applications. Making that bridge, understanding how these repetitions help you develop reflex, help you burn in good fluid technique. That's the beauty of the drills. And being able to do that in a scalable way that you can really amp up that intensity is what helps you develop combative reflex, the type of stuff that you can trust on the street. The next drill we're going to look at is Puno Sombrata. We've already got the Sombrata drill. There are elements of this that are similar to the Sombrata drill, elements of this that are also similar to the Serrata drill that we learned earlier. So you should see a lot of common ground here. The main thing we're going to be learning out of this, and the primary learning point that you want to get out of this, is the idea for an overhead attack. When that's coming in, picking that up from the outside, which is something you ought to be familiar with because you're familiar with our version of Hubud, which again, for an overhead attack, we're basically passing that and feeding it into the wedge of this hand, which is really the strength of it. Well, if this hand isn't in position to do that, we still want to have the ability to pick up an overhead attack from the outside and guide it around. That's really what we're after. So the way this drill works, we'll start the same way we did the Serrata drill, so we have some common ground to build on. If I throw an angle 3 at Vince, he does a meet for the angle 3, comes back with the angle 2. Now normally in the Serrata drill, what I would do is I would release his hand here and I would feed so that he could do that roof block. No problem. This is where, again, the energy that we give each other and how we manipulate our partner is going to determine what he does based on what he feels. That's part of that chess game again. So let's say we do 3, 2, but now what I do is I maintain this check and I take that shot at his head. The most natural thing for him to do is to come from the outside and to parry that down and around. I'm still trying to maintain my check. Notice that what he does is he shoves my hand into my other hand. That not only clears my check on his hand, but it also gets a nice cut on my wrist. At this point, he comes back angle 3 on me. I cut and check. I fire the angle 2. He's maintaining the check. I guide this down and around and take a piece out of him. Now, this is the only part that is kind of tenuous on here as far as guiding this down and taking this cut. It's just something where you have to have enough separation between your hands to where you don't nick yourself. To quote my friend James Keating, when people ask him, how do you keep from cutting yourself here? You just don't. Wise advice, okay? So from here I cut, come back angle 3, 2, overhead, he guides it down and around, 3, 2, overhead, guides it down and around. Excellent. So again, the primary thing you're learning here is that ability to guide that down and around. What this is going to give us is also a feed into some other things. If we look at the applications for this drill, that's where we'll start to see those things come into play. And it also allows us to go back and again, find some common ground with what we already know. Build on current knowledge and understanding. When we're doing the guide down here, whether we cut this or not doesn't really matter. That's not important. What we're doing from here is throwing an angle 3. What's our most popular angle 3? What's our favorite shot? Cutting that quad. We know that's a mobility kill. So let's say that, let's review the idea of an angle 2, meet for the angle 2, passing that, and collecting it on this side. Remember that? Let's do-si-do and show that again. So the angle 2 to come in, we've looked before at the idea of passing this through, pressure cut here, and then cut that quad. Well, let's say that since we're passing through zone 2, zone 4, on our way over here to collect this, that we simply start with the overhead. So now that comes through here, I stir that down and around, pass it to here, and cut. I can do it with the pressure cut. Or right out of the drill where I would do this, followed by an angle 3, the attack comes here, I wrap that down, and I simply come across with that angle 3 as I collect this. Very practical application. And what's great about that, if my knife isn't in position to deal with that attack when it's coming in, the live hand has to loom large and do the work. So again, Vince attacks, bring that down, and I'm right into that cut on the angle 3. I've got good solid control over the arm at that point. This also allows me to collect this and pull him off balance and force him to put weight on the leg that I just crippled. The other applications out of this, as far as the angle 2 push-pull coming over the top, we already know what that's for. We've seen that out of the Serrata drill. With this, again, picking up this hand is what we're really after. So now let's take a look at how we transition in drills and how we can challenge ourselves based on what we already know. Let's go ahead and review the Sombrata drill and show you how to essentially prompt your partner to jump into Puno Sombrata. So if we go along, 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead, 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. There's our basic Sombrata. Now what just happened there? What happened, 1, 4, 3, 2. At this point, if I let go, Vince is free to do the Sombrata drill by doing the roof block. If I don't let go, he feels that. As I come overhead, he immediately transitions into Puno Sombrata. He does the appropriate thing because he's also had that isolated skill development through the Puno Sombrata drill. He feels the difference. He knows that when that hand is trapped, this hand has to loom large. That's an interesting thing from a body mechanics standpoint too. Let's take a look at that for a moment. Anytime that anyone is checking you, we check a lot at the back of the elbow. Go ahead and check the back of the elbow. If I try to turn back with this, Vince has me. There's no way for me to get back. But go ahead and maintain that pressure. If I bring this hand around, notice that I can counter that. What that does is it rotates my body, rotates my shoulders to stabilize my core so I can then face him. If I only use my back muscles and try to turn back, can't do it. Bring this hand around and I can face him. That's a huge part of Puno Sombrata as well. So even though this hand is checked in Puno Sombrata, Vince is checking down here, this allows me to free that and to bring that around into a position to where I can regain the advantage. Lots of learning points built into the drill. Don't confuse the drill with just rote repetition of random movements. Look at the concepts behind it, look at what you're actually learning from it, focus on that development, and you get a lot out of it. The next drill we're going to look at is one that I actually picked up from Lightning Scientific Arnis as a stick drill. And it's called the speed drill. I adapted that to MBC knife to kind of fill in some of the blanks as far as what I considered vulnerabilities based on the other drills we practiced. For example, if we're doing sombrata, let's say I feed Eric an angle 1, when he comes back angle 4, I get used to always dealing with an angle 4. I may not be as ready to deal with, say, an angle 2 coming back at me this way. That leaves a vulnerability. So we always try to plug those holes and come up with a drill that allows us to develop that reflex. So between going from the angle 4 to the angle 2, we also practice our motion of going fingers up, fingers down, being able to respond accordingly. So with the speed drill, what we're going to do, I attack with an angle 1, Eric cuts and checks with a meat. He's thrusting toward the side of my neck here, I check. Here we're going to rely on some things we already know, which is basically push, pull, Serrata. I come over the top, he's already prepped to do that roof block. He comes back angle 1, I cut and check, I thrust here, he push, pull, Serrata, he comes back over the top, and I roof block. Now, it may seem like a lot of stuff going on, but it's really not. If we go back and look at the Serrata drill, which we already know, I throw an angle 3, 2, overhead, he comes back, 3, 2, overhead. That should be familiar to you. All we're doing differently here is 1, 2, overhead, 1, 2, overhead. Very similar to the Serrata drill, we've just moved everything up to the high line. You get a great drill that gives you nice hand speed and the ability to flow against all angles on the high line, overhead, angle 1, and angle 2. Now this drill, when you look at it a little bit deeper, and especially when you look at it from the traditional Filipino applications, there's some cool things that you can learn out of this as well, although not all of them are really relevant to MBC because of our targeting system. When we look at the idea of the angle 1 here, thrusting here, there's the check. At this point, Eric does his push-pull, he comes over the top. Notice the rotation of my hand to be able to achieve that roof block. So I'm basically here, here, and then I rotate to do this. Well, that rotation is a comma cut. We already know that. We typically practice that on the angle 3 and then the comma cut across the quad. It also applies with a 2 or a 4 and then rolling so that we go palm down to cut across. What that gives us, and again, the traditional Filipino application, we're here, if Eric didn't check this and I were to thrust, if I was successful with my thrust, I would comma cut this and come out the other side. Again, for our purposes, it's really not relevant. When we start getting into some of the improvised weapon applications of what we do, we borrow heavily from this type of lethal force application to be able to amp things up with less capable weapons. But what this gives us from a functional standpoint, let's say that we look at the physiological potential of that comma cut. and we go back to the idea that Eric does check my hand. So we're here, he checks this, I use this to clear. I get that hand out of the way, and maybe now I look at the Serrata against that bicep. So again, he comes in here, I thrust, I clear this, and then take the Serrata against the bicep. So the motion we're getting out of this is the clearing line instead. There's a lot of good physiology and a good physiological potential built into this. You just have to realize what the capabilities are. So when you look at this motion, there's a lot of good stuff there. If you don't want to go in that direction, doesn't matter. We still have this to here, which we've looked at before as a 1 to a 4. Now we look at it as a 1 to a 2. Eric attacks, bang, right into that armpit here. Let's take a look at that from the other side. So again, he attacks. This is armpit here. And again, we can finish our technique. We already know that application as a meet for an angle 1. This initial reaction here taken out of the speed drill gives us the reflex for that application. Speed drill, very similar to the Serrata drill, gives you a little bit different set of mechanics, and it also teaches you to protect that left side of your neck against angle 2 attacks. Add it to your system of drills. The next drill we're going to look at is a drill that is specific to NBC. I call it the pendulum drill. And what this is designed to do is to create a framework that allows you to practice your knife deployment skills. We're going to be looking at it here with a folding knife, which is primarily what we carry. You can do it with a fixed blade as well, but it really shines when you do it with a folder. The way we're going to start this off is by first defending empty-handed. We're starting off with the knife in the pocket, and Vince is going to attack with an overhead strike. So when he attacks, I'm picking this up from the outside using the same type of parry that we would use in the Puno Sombrata drill, the same initial motion we use in our Hubud drill. And at the same time, I'm stepping back with my right foot. I want to blade my weapon side back. This also allows me, as Kelly McCann would say, to open the gate and create a little bit of distance as I do this. So again, Vince strikes, I respond by stepping back this way. Now what I'm going to do is step forward and strike Vince the same way. So my right foot comes forward, I strike at him, and now he opens the gate and steps back. He comes back and strikes at me again. This time when he strikes, I'm going to draw my knife as I step back. So I'm combining the motion of deflecting here with the draw of the knife. Once I have the knife in hand, still closed, I'm going to practice using this as an impact weapon. So I step forward, strike at Vince again. He draws his knife. He comes back. Now there's my opening. I come back at him with the open knife. He comes back in, and I pick that up. We flow into whatever drill we happen to want to do at that point. So let's take a look at that again. What we've got is the flow. You notice the pendulum name comes from stepping back, stepping forward. You also hear this referred to in the Filipino martial arts as floating foot, the idea of floating this foot back and forward again. You'll see that in some systems such as Kali Illustrissimo. So again, Vince strikes, I step back, I strike at him, he strikes again, I draw, I strike at him, he draws, I open, he opens, and we begin our flow and go into, in this case, Sombrata. Now once you get the basics down in that methodical step-by-step forward, back, what you want to do is start challenging yourself to do things sooner. What I mean by that is Vince strikes, I parry, I step back, and I draw my knife. I strike at him, he draws his knife. I open, he opens, and again we can flow into whatever drill we want to do. So what I did was I skipped the initial empty hand strike and I went straight to my draw stroke. Practice that a few times, get that down, and then what you want to do is combine the idea of deflecting, drawing, and opening your knife all into one motion. So progressively what we're doing is challenging you more and more to get that knife out quickly. So now Vince would strike, I would step back, draw, and open. He steps back, draws, and opens, and we're into our flow. So what we do is use this methodology to be able to practice our skills to the point to where I can be deflecting, drawing, opening my knife, and coming right back into the fight very fluidly. By building it in this way, I also practice immediate backups. So let's say that Vince strikes at me, I step back and I'm trying to open my knife and it's just not working. I step forward and I go to hammer him with that closed knife. He may get his knife out, at which point I then open and we figure out where we want to pick things up. I was initially behind the curve. I wanted an open knife here, it wasn't working. Rather than fumbling with this and waiting for him to renew his attack, I stepped right back in with the closed knife, use it as an impact tool, and try to create the opportunity to get that blade out to finish the fight on better terms. By practicing in this way to where you can get better and better, and also realize when things don't perform, you can back up a step to the earlier version that gives you a built-in backup technique. That's the beauty of the pendulum drill. Practice it back and forth, challenge your ability to get your knife out quickly, because that's one of the things that's missing from many traditional knife arts. It is a big part of MBC. MBC has a number of different training drills, as you've seen already in this series. Each of those drills was chosen or created for the MBC system to be able to isolate and refine a specific skill. Once you've mastered that drill, once you've refined that particular skill, the idea is to put them all together in what we call the chess game. And the chess game is basically a training methodology that allows us to flow from one drill to another, to take selected components out of one drill and plug them into another one, and to do so spontaneously. I'm doing it to challenge my partner, he does it to challenge me, and what we end up with is a good controlled framework where nobody's getting hurt, but at the same time it's very spontaneous, very unpredictable, and that's what promotes reflex. So if we take a look at this just in basic terms, if we think about how we learned the Sombrata drill, let's start out with 6 count as we did earlier. So we have angle 1, angle 4, overhead, 1, 4, overhead, 1, 4, overhead. This should be pretty familiar to you already. If not, go back and review that section of the video. So we learned that. Then we learned the Serrata drill. So we attack angle 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead, 3, 2, overhead. Again, old hat. When we look at Sombrata, what we've got is 1, 4, so far it's 6 count, and then we introduce 3, 2, overhead. 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. So what we did was we actually built the Sombrata drill out of 2 other drills. What that means is if I decide that I want to go back into one of those other drills, I don't have to tell my partner what's going on. It's already a component part of that. If in the midst of this, I do a reflex check and we say, okay, I went back to Sombrata here. Watch this, I'll go Serrata on this side. Bang. Now what we have is half of one drill here, half of the other drill here. Sombrata on this side, Serrata on this side. What you can do is mix and match. That's the whole goal of this. You want to get to the point to where things start to become spontaneous. And the way to understand that is by looking at the angles. If you flow chart these things out, like with Sombrata, we have 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead. Okay. If I flow charted that out as far as the sequence of angles, all I have to look at is what other drills share those same angles. And can I use that as a jumping off point to jump into that drill? So let's say we're doing Sombrata, 1, 4, 3, 2, overhead, 1, 4, 3, 2. Hey, there's an overhead in Hubud. I picked that up, that became my transition there. There's an overhead in Sombrata, so I'll take that back. What else has an overhead? Puno Sombrata. I don't want to do that one anymore. Eric does. I kind of forced him to, actually. So now I'm doing Sombrata on this side. He's doing Puno Sombrata on that side. You can see how just with a little bit of imagination, just with a little bit of spontaneity, and most importantly, an open mind, you can really make this into a dynamic chess game. It's a great way to challenge you. It's a great way to challenge your partner. And it's a great way to get a lot of spontaneity in your training, develop some really useful reflexes while still maintaining a controlled environment. A lot of people think the only way to validate this stuff is to go force on force. Well, if you're going force on force just for the sake of beating the snot out of each other, you're not learning anything. You're not isolating any skills. And all you're realizing is, well, I guess I'm durable enough to where if I get my ass kicked on the street, I'll live through it. Not good enough. What you want is something that's scalable. So let's have some fun. Excellent. Totally spontaneous, high speed, challenging each other. I'm not telling Eric what I'm doing. He's not telling me what he's doing. You get to rock and you have to flow with it. You develop it to the point to where your reactions are that spontaneous, you're going to have good skills to use on the street. One of the sayings I have in Martial Blade Concepts is you don't have to fight like me, you just have to fight well. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're able to draw things from it that are going to add to your skill set. So if you ever have to fight, you'll fight well. Train hard and stay safe.